middle of this sermon series, and it's based on a book called All the Places to Go. So you can see the title up there by John Ortberg, who's a pastor in California. And today we're talking about the doors we open for others. So let me tell you that somehow the Olympics, opening doors for others, and a man bun all have something in common. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say man bun? Yeah? You know what I'm talking about? Somebody tell me, what's man bun? Don't be shy. It's a piece of bread made by a man? No. A bun made by a man? Up here, right, thank you. It was Matt Damon with his fake man bun. Actually, it was so funny at the earlier service, a guy who has lost all of his hair, demonstrated man bun for us. It was hilarious. Okay, so at the Olympics this week, one of the competitors named Emma Coburn, and she won a bronze medal in the steeplechase. Hold on, my computer wants to make sure it's me. All right. So she won a bronze medal in the steeplechase, but before she could do that, she was like getting ready for her final run, and she's standing there like literally at the start line. I'm thinking this is one of those instances where you've got all your ducks in a row except for one, and she realizes she doesn't have a hair tie. This girl, if you've seen her, she has like big, long, blonde hair, right? And she's standing at the start line of a race with no hair tie. The steeplechase is 3,000 meters, by the way. Can you just imagine like running 3,000 meters with no hair tie? And if you've seen the steeplechase, it's not just running. They put like obstacles in front of them. They have to jump over hurdles, and then some of them are like bigger than a hurdle, and then there's water on the other side. You've never seen this? You're looking at me like, whoa, really? I know. So she's getting ready to start her steeplechase at the Olympics and no hair tie. Like, this could really ruin it all, right? And there's one of the guys on the men's team, and he runs the men's steeplechase, which was going to be the next day. And he's standing there, and he happens to have a man bun. And he's used to carrying the hair tie on his wrist. So he just takes it off. He's like, oh, here you go. She throws it in her hair and wins a bronze medal. Door opened. Right? Come on, that's funny. That's really funny. And then they like had this whole magic juju thing with the hair tie, because apparently she won bronze with it. And so then the joke was the next day he should use the same hair tie, which he did. He won silver. I'm just saying, it's a magic hair tie. But actually, as I read the story, all joking aside, it really is a story about you never know when you could open the door for someone else. It could be something really small like that, or it could be something even bigger where it really involves a whole lot of self-sacrificing, right? So today we read the story of Ruth. And actually the part of Ruth that we read is like more towards the end. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes before that part in Ruth. So the story of Ruth, actually Ruth doesn't even enter the story until later. It starts out with Naomi, her mother-in-law. So Naomi and her husband and their two sons live in Bethlehem in Judah, but there's a famine in the land, and there's not enough food for everybody. They're going to die if they stay there, and so they have to move. So they go to Moab. And once in Moab, then they decide, okay, well, our sons need to find wives, and they really set up their home there, and they marry their sons to two women, Ruth, and the other one is Orpah. Interesting note about the name Orpah. Do you ever look at some Bible names and you're like, who would ever name their child after that biblical name, right? There is someone very famous named Orpah who you would never guess. Oprah. That's right. It's Oprah. She was supposed to be Orpah, but her mom misspelled it on the birth certificate. So Oprah Winfrey, all right. Okay, so Naomi's sons marry Orpah and Ruth, and they live their pretty humdrum regular lives for 10 years, and nothing too huge happens, or at least nothing that got written about in the Bible. And but then Naomi's husband dies, and her two sons die, and now everything has changed. And at this point, I feel like there are choices to be made, and there are doors that open to these women, and in particular, doors that open to the daughters-in-law. So I call them door 1 and door 2. So door 1 is the one that you would predict according to their society and their time. And that's when Naomi turns to her daughters-in-law, both Orpah and Ruth, and she says, I have nothing to offer you. You know, I have no husband, I have no land, I have no worldly means, I have nothing to sustain you. And so go. I'm telling you, go back to your families, go back to your mother's house and start again. That's door number 1. And, they go back and forth a couple of times, and the daughters fight with her on it, and then Naomi says, no, go, and tells them again. Anyway, in the end, Orpah ends up choosing door number 1. And a lot of times I feel like we look at Orpah, we look at Ruth, and we put Ruth up on a pedestal because she chose something different, and we tend to look at Orpah like, oh, well, she obviously didn't choose wisely. She just did what was expected of her, whatever. Actually, we probably shouldn't do that, because Orpah did take an opportunity, and she did go through an open door. And that was kind of Naomi's way of being able to offer an open door to Orpah. So as I was putting together the sermon, I was always focused on, Ruth being the one who gets to open a door for someone else, but really Naomi got to do that too. And she opened a door for Orpah, because then it talks about in 2 Samuel about Orpah goes on to have 4 sons who are these very stalwart warriors who fight on behalf of the king. So that really was a door that opened to her. She went back and reclaimed her past, and then that was her key to the future. But really, being able to open any door to anybody is a huge gift. In the book, All the Places to Go, John Ortberg says that every heart comes with a door. We all have the possibility of opening up to someone. And having a door of someone's heart open to you is one of the greatest gifts of a life. To respond well to that open door, though, requires time, it requires energy, it requires vulnerability and discernment. So the way in which we decide to reach out and offer an opportunity to someone else really takes a lot of care. And a lot of trust, I would say that too. So we have this jar at our house that's called the trust jar. I know, it just looks like a regular mason jar to you, but to us it's magic. We started this exercise, we did it 6 months ago or something, and I took all these little marbles or whatever, and we divided them up between all of us, and we just kind of sat at the table and got to play a game where we get to put a marble in the jar as we talk about things that sort of have built trust in our family. So I feel like I can trust all of you because when I tell you about I'm having a bad day, you don't laugh at me and make fun. Or I felt like I could trust you all because you really believe in me and you encourage me to do good things. And so gradually we filled up the jar, right? Well, then we forgot about the jar. It sits on my nightstand. Margaret is really the one that keeps us on task. This is her thing that she loves. So every once in a while she'll come into my room and she'll put another marble in and she'll tell me just something beautiful that takes away my breath, right? But this is the jar of trust, which means that when trust is broken, we've also done it the other way where you reach in and you take one out, right? So it kind of goes both ways. And being able to open doors for one another involves a relationship, and it involves this element of trust, where I trust that I can do this new possibility that someone has offered me because I know that they're offering it to me with the purest of heart, the greatest of intentions, trust. Which I've been thinking a lot about in watching the Olympics, because I'm just gonna call it what it is. Watching the Olympics has been sermon prep for me the last couple of weeks. No, not for you, not at your job, not sermon prep, watching the Olympics. I'm just going to classify it that way. But I, in particular, have been watching all the volleyball events. Doesn't matter to me. The indoor court volleyball, the sand volleyball, it doesn't matter. I think it's awesome. And I know, yay. And the USA women's volleyball team has been in particularly, it's just caught my eye because of their coach. So I didn't actually know who their coach was until this round of the Olympics. And you're going to have to say his name for me, Ryan. Karai. That's why I keep saying Karali in my head. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. He's a former sand player. Not just a former sand player. Thank you. Yes. Like the best sand player ever. And I found out he played indoor too. So he's this all-round player. In fact, people have labeled him the winningest player in volleyball history. So we're talking big. As a player, you kind of learn to master your own skills. Right? As a player, he learned to really push the edge of what he could do physically, right? And then in volleyball, there's this huge mental side of volleyball and staying present in the moment, watching your opponent. It's all about placement of the ball. And so he learned kind of to control his own emotions and control the mental game within inside himself, which is great. And I'm sure that he's opened a ton of doors to other players throughout the years. So they did this expose on him, NBC did. And they had snippets from other players like Carrie Walsh Jennings and a couple others who talked about the inspiration he had been to them. And now they're these huge players, But he has made this switch that not a lot of really successful sports players can do, because he's made the switch from player to coach, right? They're totally different roles. And it's not often, a lot of players try it, but it's not often that someone can transition into the role of coach successfully. So NBC asked him, they said, so how have you been able to do this? Because obviously he's having success with the women's team. He said, it really wasn't easy. He said, I had to learn how to be calm. I had to master poise, of all things. And I had to learn to be patient. Because in order to be a coach, especially in a game where the coach is really present with the team in the game, like some of the sports, the coaches have to sit in the stands alongside everybody else. They can't really be involved. But volleyball, you're right there. So your emotions are playing into the emotions of the team. He said, I kind of had to learn to let go of my own emotions and what was going on inside of my head so that I was available and able to be more present with my players and help them figure out what was going on inside of their game and inside of the team. It's a totally different approach. So there are a lot of different ways that we can open doors to other people. Ruth has a choice to open a door. And we already talked about how Naomi opened a door for Orpah. But then I feel like Ruth has the option to open door number 2. Because she could have done the same thing that Orpah did. And actually, that probably would have been the smart choice for Ruth. Because if she had gone back to her family, at least she knew that she would have been sustained, that someone would have supported her, that she wouldn't be left destitute on her own. But instead, she sees this opportunity, which I think we need to just lay out what the situation is between Naomi and Ruth at this point. They've been family together for 10 years. So there's quite the basis of a relationship there, for better or for worse, right? Mother-in-law, daughter-in-law for 10 years, ebbs and flows. And the husband, the father has just died, and Ruth's husband has just died, the son has just died, and so there's a lot of grief. And we hear it from Naomi. So if you read the story and you listen to Naomi talk, she's totally devastated. She is bottom of the barrel. It does not get any worse than this. All she talks about is how much she has lost. She says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter. I'm bitter. I got nothing left. And in this situation, she sees no open doors. She knows she has to go back to her homeland so that, maybe there's some family there who will take care of her, and she will be dependent on them for the rest of her life. And she sees no hope. Ruth could have been in the same situation. Her husband just died. She's going to have to start all over if it's possible for her to remarry and start all over. But she sees an opening. She can go home and be safe in her own right. But if she chooses this door number 2 and she chooses to go with Naomi, then she might open a door for Naomi. Because Naomi by herself is completely and totally dependent. But if Ruth goes with her, Ruth is still a lot more able-bodied. And if Ruth then remarries when they get to Judah, then she can bring Naomi into her family with her. There's an open door for someone else. So Ruth chooses to go with Naomi. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and even death will not separate us. And this choice that Ruth makes ties her together with the verses in Hebrews. So this chapter 13 in Hebrews talks about how we go outside of the norms when we follow Christ. So before the ones we read today, it talks about how literally on that path, Jesus to crucifixion, as he's carrying the cross, he goes outside of the city gates, and then he's crucified on the hill outside of Jerusalem. That literally when we are following God, we're going outside of what might be expected of us. And it ties together Ruth's story with this long tradition of responding to God's call and going outside of the norms. So to go with Jesus outside of the city is also to join Abraham. It's also to join all the company of faithful pilgrims who have left a homeland in search of the homeland, who have left a city in search of the city. And by declaring themselves strangers and aliens on the earth, they took on abuse that goes with the life of a pilgrim. To be without identity, to be without status or a place in the world. In other words, they suffered shame and public abuse. And that's what Ruth is doing. That's what she's saying when she goes with Naomi. And this word sacrifice, it was in the Hebrew passage, kept playing over and over in my mind this week. So I went to have a Bible dictionary, so it defines all of these special words that we use in church, right? A little bit more definitive than going to Webster's dictionary. So I open it up and I'm looking for sacrifice. What exactly does sacrifice mean? Did you know there is not a separate entry for sacrifice in that Bible dictionary? It says, see worship. That sacrifice is so tied up in worshiping God that it's not even really its own thing. It's a part of worship. So worship is to bow down, prostrate yourself, and sacrifice is brought as a gift to God as you're doing this act of worship. Now, the most important part of any animal sacrifice during Ruth's time is how the blood is used. Because otherwise, you're just killing an animal. It's just slaughter, right? But to make it sacrifice, the blood is poured upon the altar. It's even slathered on top of the altar. It's dripped around the altar. And the manner in which it's given matters too. There's certain parts of the sacrifice that the person who's making it has to do. And then there's other parts of it that a priest has to do. And then there's rules about what you can sacrifice, right? Because wouldn't it be cool? If you're going to make a sacrifice anyway, it would kind of work out to your benefit if you could just bring, the smallest of your animals, right? Or maybe a sick one. No, a sacrifice had to be unblemished, is what it was called. There's certain animals that are acceptable. So cattle, sheep, goats, doves, pigeons, those are all acceptable, but they had to be the best. Not injured, not sick. You couldn't even offer an animal that had already been castrated, because when you're offering the animal, you're also offering all the lineage and all the animals that may have come from that animal. And you could also offer, I don't think of this often, but you could offer other things, not just animal sacrifices. Apparently, you could offer vegetables. Anybody? Yes? We could sacrifice vegetables? No? Tough crowd today, guys. Come on. You could sacrifice vegetables, wheat, barley, olive oil, frankincense, but all of it had to be unblemished. Had to be your very, very best. Meaning that actually a sacrifice is a really intentional act. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, and it requires giving something to God to benefit God and not us. So Ruth's choice was like this. Ruth's choice was an intentional act, and I would say even an act of worship. So one last story about this phenomenal town that I heard about that is just famous for opening doors for people. It started with a woman named Ellen Baxter, who she just became fascinated with the idea of treating mentally ill people. And basically, I think she was looking for a more humane way of treating mentally ill people than just necessarily medicating them. And so it started with her doing all this research and then deciding, I think I really need to do like some in-person, on-the-job sort of research training. And so she decided that she would get herself into, as a patient, a mental hospital, right? Because she just wanted to see how mentally ill people were being treated inside of a mental hospital. So she got her professor, because she was a student at the time, got her professor on board, and then the local psychiatrist made up a fake diagnosis for her, and she got admitted into the mental hospital. My question is, how'd she get out? But they don't really tell that part of the story from what I was reading. So she's in this hospital for 7 days, and she's just observing to see what sorts of treatment are happening. And she said, I really didn't see a whole lot of treatment. I saw medication, and I saw a whole lot of boredom. There's a lot of TV, actually. She said the whole day was structured by this system of bells, like just a little ding-ding-ding bell to wake up, ding-ding-ding bell for morning meds, ding-ding-ding bell for breakfast, ding-ding-ding bell for snack, ding-ding-ding bell, more meds. You get it, right? This is like the pattern of life. She said, well, no wonder. That's enough to make anybody go crazy. And to really strip you of your humanity. So as she's looking for more humane ways to treat mentally ill folks, she did a ton of research, and she happened upon this town in Belgium called Hale. And it's spelled really funny, G-E-E-L-L. Yeah, G-E-E-L, but they say Hale. And Hale has been taking in and treating mentally ill people for hundreds of years. It all started with the patron saint of mentally ill folks who was martyred in their town. And they decided that they would make a unique place for anyone who's struggling with mental illness. And they don't call them patients, they call them boarders, right? So in the town of Hale, there is like an intake building in the middle of the town. And so someone with a mental illness comes in, and they see all the doctors and the nurses and whatever. And then a family shows up. And there are all these host families in the town who take in someone with mental illness into their home, and that's where they live. I know, doesn't that sound risky? To us, that sounds absolutely crazy. And so the reporter who was talking about this story asked them, said, isn't that really crazy? Like that, I mean, I know you're taking in crazy people, haha, but isn't that really crazy that you would let someone like that into your home? They said, why not? My parents did it. My grandparents did it. It just seems normal to us. I said, but doesn't like unpredictable, really weird things happen? They said, oh yeah, most definitely. One family talked about a guy they had living with them who would hallucinate lions, like fierce lions that would attack him. And then there was another family who hosted somebody who just was, he got really attached to the mom and the family and would just constantly want to hug her and be near her, and like to the point that it like disrupted the relationships between her and the rest of the family, right? But my favorite was the family who had a man who they call the button guy. And this guy, he dressed up in a button-up shirt every day, but part of something that he just obsessed about was his buttons, and he would twist the buttons off every day. And so every night his host mom would sew the buttons back on. And somebody went to the host mom and said, well, why don't you sew them back on with like fishing line? And then he wouldn't be able to twist them off, right? And she was appalled. She said, no, he needs to twist the buttons off. That's who he is. The bottom line is that the families who welcome in the boarders in Hale, their job is not to try and fix them. Their job is to just open the door and give them a place to be who they are and see what happens. The same thing is true of us. The same thing is true of Ruth. Over and over in our scriptures and over in our lived experience of God, we find that doors are open to us and that we have the opportunity to open doors to others. What doors are you opening? We'll continue our worship through the giving of our tithes and our offerings.